Hi there, Megan Thompson with Megan Thompson Coaching, and today we're going to speak all about what to do when you feel embarrassed by your child's behavior. So, if you're parenting a highly sensitive child who is melting down on a daily basis, shutting down on a daily basis, it can feel inevitable that you will be embarrassed, maybe even on a daily basis. And so, if this is a challenge that you find yourself having at home or out in public, then definitely stay tuned. We're going to discuss all about it. So let's talk about where you might be stuck, right? So parenting a highly sensitive child can feel quite draining when you're stuck in the meltdown cycle. Now, what do I mean by the meltdown cycle? Those of you who are just joining us here on today's show, many parents are struggling with their big feeling kid who notices all kinds of emotions, who can be emotionally reactive and struggle with managing how to display empathy, compassion, and big positive feelings as well. And with all of that jumbled up and confused in their own brains, your highly sensitive child's emotional experience can feel a lot like Pigpen's dust bubble, just following them around. Hopefully at the holiday season, you're catching my Charlie Brown drift here in that reference. But what I'm talking about is just this big, giant mess that your child can be feeling like on the inside. Their big emotions, when they're disorganized, can really show up in massive, destructive and impulsive behavior. So what do I mean by that, right? If your child is struggling, then we can see that your child might be hitting, throwing things even in the direction of siblings or at you, hitting you, kicking you, throwing their bodies on the floor, or doing other unsafe behaviors like running away, slamming the door, refusing to ask for help when struggling, and shutting down or isolating. And those of you who are working with who are parenting teenagers or even preteens, you might have heard, and some of you who are parenting younger children as well, you know, here at MTC, we hear it often. Children will say things like, I hate you, I wish that I was never alive, you'd be better off without me, etc. And that is not age specific, though if you're parenting a teen, a lot of these behaviors can likely look more internal. You know, your teen can be shutting off and shutting down everything other than their phones. They might be struggling with paying attention in school, or even feeling motivated to do their work at home or other responsibilities, or losing interest in their daily activities, things that they used to feel quite motivated to complete, right? So this might be sports or extracurricular activities, other interests. And many of you know that this and the challenges of your child's behavior and your teenagers' responses to you haven't been just because they are experiencing some isolation with a pandemic, right? This has been pervasive. It's been a challenge that you've noticed. Might have been different behaviors when your child was younger, but you've noticed that your child has thought about and felt about big things in their life, and even small things in their life, with deep, deep emotional experiences, and asking all kinds of wise questions, thinking about things 6 ways to Sunday before wanting to come up with the exact right answer. All of these experiences that you're having and you're witnessing with your child, they're all related to the highly sensitive personality trait. And if it's gotten to the point where you're experiencing daily or multiple times a week, even multiple times a day, meltdowns or shutdowns, this is the problem that we help families solve. We've served hundreds of families who are stuck in this meltdown cycle. Many of you are parenting sensitive kids and wondering whether or not this everyday explosive or outburst behavior is just run-of-the-mill for kids who feel big feelings, right? And I have the message for you in all of our shows that is not the case, right? It's really, really important that we are covering here today that when you are struggling with this big behavior, this is absolutely something that can be addressed. And it's something that can be addressed systematically rather than just feeling like your child is struggling over and over and over again, and you're just waiting for the other shoe to drop when you're on a streak of not seeing those big behaviors. Many of the families that we work with can also describe, before they get started, a period of 1, 2, 3 weeks. You might even see this during the holiday season where there's less responsibility. Your kid gets some time to chill. Maybe that's maybe school's overwhelming for them, or the extracurriculars are overwhelming for them, whatever it is. And it's really important to notice over time, over the last 6 months to a year, has your child been struggling with these major behaviors? And make sure that you're making decisions about how to parent your child from a, what I call, zoomed out perspective, right? Take a picture that is much longer than 2 weeks in order to observe your child's big behaviors and see whether or not your child has been making significant progress based on what you've been doing and leading them, because anything over 2 weeks is a behavior pattern. And that's really, really important to observe, because, on the flip side, as we see parents who are noticing a great week, it's really important to observe, does that great week last longer than the 14 days? And that's where you can start to notice whether or not your child's behavior has just switched gears and they've been able to notice a different way that they need to express their big emotions, or has your child been able to generalize a skill? So let's talk a little bit about this, because I mentioned feeling embarrassed by your child's behavior, and I want to speak about this from a different angle today, because many times what we focus on is how to shift your child's behavior and how to do that systematically through play, right? And through how we teach our families to address this without perpetuating shame. And yes, absolutely, that is absolutely still something that we work on with parents who frequently feel embarrassed by their children's behavior. And it's also true that it's really, really important that you notice, for your child and for you, that if you're struggling with these big emotions yourself, that it's really important to take ownership of that and your own emotional experiencing. Embarrassment is a normal human emotion. And when we think about whether or not how often you're feeling embarrassed by your child's behavior is something that you need to address, whether that be through your kid's behavior or through your own behavior or a combination of the two, then what we do in order to figure that out is we look at multiple factors. So one of the factors is whether or not your child is able to generalize their skills. So that's a little bit of a jargony word. Basically what it means is, can your child demonstrate the use of an emotional regulation skill in multiple different parts of their life? So at home, at school, at dance class or soccer practice or basketball or swim, whatever extracurricular, sports or not, coding class, art, whatever, that your kid is in. And demonstrate not just that your child is and through your own observations clearly, but not just that your child is holding it in, right? We think about this from a parent perspective. Usually, many of us have been raised to just keep it together, right? White knuckle through life, hold on to, grip the steering wheel, if you will. And in that experience for ourselves as parents, when we feel embarrassed, we can usually struggle with what to do about it. And that's what we're going to be covering today. So it's really important that you first and foremost avoid stuffing that emotion. If you're struggling with managing your own emotions and being able to decrease those on your own, then clearly that needs to be addressed first. And this can be addressed in conjunction with supporting your child. We hear parents say that they need to perhaps go to their own therapy if they're getting frustrated with their kid, or they might need to work with their own, start doing meditation or some other sort of calm down strategy, and maybe that will help address their child's big emotions. And it's important to observe that that's just one part of the puzzle. Owning your side of the street still leaves your child to walk on their side of the street. And so it's really important to observe that relationship to stay with the cliche, is a two-way street. Your child needs to learn their own skills to manage their big behaviors. And as your child's leader in the home, you need to develop those skills as well. And what we found to be most effective is when we address them at the same time. And that can be really tricky for parents when we think about all of the other obligations and responsibilities on your plate. So I want to name what needs to be addressed, right? If you feel embarrassed by your child's behavior, it is important to accept that emotion. And it's also important to not accept your child's meltdowns as normal. This is really important because when we think about being highly sensitive and that is a-okay, that there's a way for the highly sensitive brain to operate without meltdowns, that can feel pretty surprising for you if this is something you've been dealing with for many years. Or if you've heard from a pediatrician or a therapist that either your child's behavior is wrong or typical. Neither of them neither of those perspectives is relevant here, right? This is really important to observe. Your child's big emotional meltdowns are just a symptom of the meltdown cycle. And this is really clearly important because if you're struggling with this feedback for your child, part of how you're giving your child feedback and how you're speaking to your child, but also whether or not you think your child is capable of building those skills based on what you've already tried so far, all of that is likely related to why you are still stuck in supporting your child and breaking out of this pattern. So that's why we work with parents. And when we think about being able to address the problem, the major problem that parents have is in thinking that highly sensitive kids need to manage their own emotions through their own work with their own professional. And the research simply does not support that. When we think about what research we're talking about, I'm talking about Elaine Aron's research, of course, because she has done some of the research related to parenting highly sensitive kids, though some of it has been quite anecdotal because she does not specialize in working with children. It's also true that it's important to observe all of the other research professionals who have observed highly sensitive kids and the parent-child relationship. And what does that mean? You are the catalyst of change for your highly sensitive child. You as a parent, mom, dad, a grandparent, major caregiver, you are the person who needs to guide your child into building different skills. Why is that important? It's not just because you know what your child is involved in and what challenges they might be having, right? One of the things that we know for sure is that many parents who are engaging in seeking support from outside providers is that their highly sensitive child can really struggle with building those relationships, right? You are already noticing, feeling embarrassed by your kid's behavior and struggling with trying to manage that. How do you think your kid feels when they're trying to figure out what they should share about where they're struggling, right? Embarrassed. It's a normal feeling to have when you lose your mind in front of other people or even at home, right? And so when we think about kids who have big feelings, what we're asking to do, if we're using an outside resource that's not a family member, that's not a primary caregiver, what you're doing is you're asking your child to move through their own embarrassment when they don't have the skills to do that in order to learn skills to move through their own embarrassment. And basically that feels like double jeopardy to your highly sensitive child. And yes, I am calling it punishment because it does feel quite painful for sensitive kids. And so how do they handle it? Usually highly sensitive kids will go one of two ways. One, they'll refuse to go. Don't need it. No, irrelevant, right? Or they will lose it before they go because they're so overwhelmed. And so that's a screaming match and pulling teeth and trying to buckle them in and pick up their body. And when they're 6, 7, 8 years old is really, really difficult. Or they put on a brave face and they put on a nice, beautiful show and they tell you exactly what you want to hear. And this is to the outside provider, whether that be a therapist or if you're working on sensory needs, could be an occupational therapist where your child is just working on one part of the puzzle, and or any other situation. Could be at school with a school counselor in some sort of social group or superhero social skills communication plan, right? That can't be the main way for you to solve the problem with your sensitive kid of helping them deal with their emotional struggles and regulating that emotion. That is simply just a supplementary way to solve the problem. Why? Again, at first, it starts with you. Secondly, it's really important to notice that when you are feeling your own emotions around your child's behavior, it's really critical that you not lead your child with those emotions. What do I mean by that? If you feel embarrassed and then you feel frustrated, when you're reacting in that moment by correcting your child, even, criticizing your child by saying, how dare you, or I can't believe you just did that. Don't you see how this is embarrassing me? This is inappropriate. You just yelled at her. Say you're sorry. Any of that reactive behavior, likely is not effective, but it also can feel quite like emotional manipulation to your child. Why am I using that word? Because it's highly likely that you feel manipulated by your own child. So we got to talk straight here, because it's really important that you notice that the whole component of dealing with this meltdown cycle, when we look at a position of trying to use emotions to guide behavior, it is really just not the way that works. And both members of the family, or multiple members of the family, if your family is large, can feel manipulated in that experience. Now, we know highly sensitive kids and kids in general are not purposefully manipulative. Go watch my other videos or listen to my other shows on manipulation and whether or not your kid is a sociopath or any other perspective related to your child's purposeful behavior. Behavior is simply an after effect. A behavior is the straw that breaks the camel's back. That's the display of the straw that breaks the camel's back. So when you look at a snowball rolling down the hill, you're not going to compare the big snowball to the beginning of the snowball and think that the big snowball is the problem. You need to stop the snowball from rolling down the hill and know how to run away from that snowball once it's already down the hill. It needs to be a two-pronged approach of both prevention and responsivity. And so when we think about being able to systematically support your kid in doing that, you have to be able to slow down your own responses, right? Always starts with you when we think about parenting your kids. Next is that your child needs to learn how to feel capable in managing their emotions. So you can't plan for those emotions as if they are inevitable. That is really, really important. And when we think about parents who we work with directly, this is a big mind-blowing process when parents notice how many times and how frequently they are, back to this, gripping the steering wheel, waiting for those meltdowns to happen, and how that ripple effect impacts every aspect of your child's emotional experience during the day, even if you're not with them, can be a pretty eye-opening experience. When we help parents tap into their observation of that, it can be very impactful. When we think about what you need to be able to do, and we talk about being able to transform your relationship with your child, there has to be some pretty deep working around in that emotional relationship, right? So we need to be able to support you in having conversations with yourself around how much you are expecting your child to fail. And when we experience embarrassment, it's likely because we perceive an experience as a failure or a disappointment or some other negative assessment. There's a judgment happening there with that negative emotion. And when we keep judging those experiences, then we keep that negative emotion around. It sticks with us. And when we live in that experience and that happens over and over and over again, then we train the brain to stay there, to keep looking for times to be embarrassed or to prevent times to be embarrassed. And when you're stuck in that cycle yourself, it's very difficult for your child to learn how to break out of that cycle as well. You need to be able to feel capable that that cycle is possible of being broken. And without that sense of feeling capable, then it's quite difficult to teach a highly sensitive child how to feel capable of managing their everyday life's challenges. So when we teach parents to help their kid communicate their needs, what comes first is the child's sense of feeling capable of creatively solving their problems. And that is not something that you can convince your kid of. You can't tell your kid, oh, this too shall pass, or go ahead and just hang on. We've only got a couple more practices left before the big basketball tournament. You can handle this season. We won't sign up for next one. Any of that future-focused communication with your kid is perpetuating the same plan of asking your kid to suck it up, just like you handle your own embarrassment, right? And so being able to teach your kid how to do something differently, you need to be able to break that pattern yourself. And so when you're teaching your child to communicate their emotions, you can't ask your kid to delay their emotions in order to teach them to communicate them with you. Highly sensitive children, and all children alike, live in the present moment. The brain for children does not fully develop till beyond age 25, yet highly sensitive children can actually thrive beyond their peers' capacity to express their emotions thoroughly, deeply, and then move on from them by solving their problems very creatively. And they do that by being taught through their parents how to communicate their needs and to feel that they are trusted, heard, and understood. And that needs to be a collaborative experience between you and your kid. No other adult can teach your kid that, and no other professional can convince your kid of that. That has to be something that you need to be able to work on directly with your child and to build the skill directly with your child. And so when you teach your child that and they learn through that trust and they repair the relationship that you have noticed that you've been using ineffective parenting strategies for, then that mends any disconnect between I don't know that I can and oh yeah, I got this. It's not just because I hear my parents say it day in, day out, because I know, you know, that you've been trying to help your kid notice this. Obviously you love your kid and you've been trying all of these strategies out of love and out of sometimes out of frustration in the sense that you've gone back to some reactive strategies, but that's not for lack of love for your child. It's for lack of skill in being able to manage your own emotions, sure, in that moment. But what we're not talking about being able to perpetuate perfectionism here in your family. We're talking about being able to support your kid, forgive themselves for their challenges, forgive their future selves for making mistakes ahead of the game so that they can then manage big emotions around not being able to do things perfectly. That's a sense of capability. That's resilience, a self perspective of being resilient. And your child needs to be able to trust that they have a leadership relationship with their parent, you, in order to feel like they can bounce back from challenges. That's the relationship that matters the most to highly sensitive kids. There's been all kinds of research related to that. So we'll avoid that conversation for the sake of time. And I'll just highlight one part. Highly sensitive kids, when you improve the relationship with the parents and move it into a more positive experience. Now, what is a positive experience for kids? Kids who feel heard, understood, trusted, and clear on expectations and their safety in the home, right? Emotional and physical safety. And when all of those things are true, they experience a positive relationship with their parents. And that actually boosts the experience for highly sensitive kids and their ability to use their sensitivities as strengths, right? Being detail-oriented, we can all agree, is a strength, unless you get bogged down by those details and you can't make decisions because you're so overwhelmed and anxious that you can't see the forest for the trees, right? And so when we break out of that pattern of feeling incapable and not knowing what to do and not knowing how to make the quote-unquote right decision for fear of making a wrong one, then highly sensitive kids can use their creativity to solve problems in all kinds of ways that you as a parent, don't need to listen to that embarrassment when they make mistakes, because it's not big explosive behavior that they're making a mistake around, right? It's not big behavior that they'll never be able to recover from, or that would damage relationships if they yell at a friend and call them an idiot, or do any other sort of thing that is socially inappropriate and to the extreme, right? And so when we think about this, your child needs to be able to not only communicate their emotions with you, but of course they need to be able to ask for help. And then they also need to be able to notice their emotions before they get explosive. And we see so many parents of highly sensitive kids who aren't able to generalize that skill. Sure, you might be able to get your kid to have a conversation in a calm environment where they notice emotions. You might be able to get your kid to have a conversation after watching, some sort of episode of Bluey or Daniel Tiger or some other show on Netflix for older kids, and they might be able to name an emotion, or they might be able to read an emotion book, right? But in the moment when your child's feeling that feeling, they need to be able to notice how they experience that emotion and whether or not that emotion will pass, and how long it might take them to regulate themselves. And that is insight that a child can't learn if they don't feel safe, understood, and heard in their parent relationship. And so it's really important for you to notice that embarrassment is a signal for you to notice, what are you actually embarrassed about? Are you embarrassed about your child's behavior, or are you embarrassed about not being able to help your child thus far in breaking out of this behavior pattern? And I know that I shoot straight in some of these conversations, and that might feel really hard to hear. And it's also true that part of our mission here well, I shouldn't say part of, our major mission here at MTC is to help parents of highly sensitive kids eliminate that meltdown shutdown cycle in order to create a ripple effect to eliminate suicidal thoughts and self-harmful thoughts for highly sensitive people around the world. And that's our major mission. Now I have all this experience and expertise, and so do several members of my team, in eliminating suicidal thoughts and major self-harm, chronic self-harm behaviors with teenagers in our mental health careers. And so this is not something that I'm using as a tactic to support you in making decisions towards what I have to say about parenting your kid. It's simply just working on stopping that snowball from rolling down the hill so that you have a bigger and heavier snowball to break down as your child is older. Highly sensitive kids who engage in daily meltdowns and major destructive behaviors feel pretty crappy about themselves. I think we can all argue that to the affirmative, right? And so when you think about living in that life of feeling incapable and out of control, and how that perpetuates and consistently grows into a sense of feeling incapable of solving your problems in adolescence, that leads to a higher level of feeling like you'd rather die. And we see this go on in our mental health practice. Now here in the coaching company, when we work with parents of sensitive kids, your child might be expressing this in a more vague way, like life would be better off without them, or I wish I would die, but without a plan. And that is a clear sign for you to act now, because that is not going to stop. The snowball's already halfway down the hill. And that's really, really important for you to observe, because we've been solving this problem for families for quite some time now, and we know that it's a heck of a lot harder to do when your child is making active decisions towards ending their own life. Now, it's been a while since I've spoken about this, so I'll just share a little bit more about this. The holidays are here, and I'm just recalling my family experiences. I've lost several family members due to suicide, so it's not something that I'm here to brush under the rug or to sugarcoat. I have memories of family members who are not here because they've engaged in very risky behaviors and or died by suicide. And that's not something that every family experiences firsthand, and my family has. And so I'm here to talk about it because I know something about it, in addition to the professional experience over the last decade plus of solving this problem with parents of sensitive teens who are engaging in those risky behaviors. So when we think about being able to stop that snowball from where it starts at the top of the hill, your child needs to be able to gain that confidence that they can solve those problems and solve the problem of wanting to leave their emotional experience, hightail it out of there. When you think about what an emotional outburst or meltdown or shutdown is, it's an escape. It's not a conscious choice. Your kid isn't doing this on purpose to get out of an experience. Remember, we talked a little bit about this related to manipulation earlier today. Just like when you feel overwhelmed and you want to get out of there, it's not because you feel like you're, say for example, you're in a work meeting and your boss calls on you and you're not prepared because you didn't know that he was going to ask you about the numbers from last month related to one subset of the data points. And so you're typing in your laptop at the during the meeting, and you're wishing you could turn off your screen if it's a virtual meeting so that they didn't see your face turn red, and you're ready to and part of your brain says, I wonder what would happen if I just clicked end meeting or get out of here, leave on the Zoom call, right? Part of you wants to escape that uncomfortable experience, and yet because you have some skills perhaps, or because you have a high value of keeping your job, right? It might be that's driving your behavior. But also because you have an adult brain who's able to notice more than one thing at once without getting highly overwhelmed, you stay on the call and you try to figure out the data to report to your boss during the meeting. But highly sensitive kids who are met with surprise, frustration, disappointment, and missed expectations, that experience of needing to get out of there, right, is something that can supersede any other logic, any other knowledge of how challenges are something that your child can be capable of facing, right? That rule about life that your kid can solve big problems and can handle it goes right out the window. It's not even something your kid is considering in that moment. And so when you think about your child being able to build that confidence, that's an ingrained emotional state that your child needs to be able to handle when feeling challenged, not when feeling just encouraged, or when feeling like when they can solve problems when those problems don't feel so great, or when they're in a positive mood, right? We see parents who are struggling with observing their child having inconsistencies in their problem solving skills, and that can be one of them. When my kid is in a great mood, then sure, she can handle that we ran out of her favorite jelly. She can handle that she feels like she's going to be late, and I told her, even though we're at a red light, that we're almost there, right? But if she woke up on the wrong side of the bed, man, woof, she'd be throwing things in the car, and her water bottle, I'd be worried, would be hitting the window. All kinds of things would be a major concern for you on your way to school. And this is not just for your 4-year-old, right? Many of you who have 9-year-olds have experienced car meltdowns and how scary those can be. And while your embarrassment might not be the highest emotional experience in that moment, right? Might be more fear, might be more worry, but the other half of it could be embarrassment. How the heck am I going to get this kid to school? Can't send this kid to school in this state, etc. Right? So there's a emotion, the emotion of embarrassment taking the back seat. When we think about supporting your child and diffusing those emotions and noticing those emotions, not because they're feeling great about themselves, but because they feel capable in handling problems even when they feel a little crappy, that is a skill set that your child needs to have. They can't just roll through life expecting things to go well all the time and only use their skills when they're feeling in the mood, right? Your child needs to be able to manage emotions because that's an ingrained experience that they now have. And we teach parents how to do that in a systematic way that doesn't show their child that they just have a million things to fix in terms of how they handle problems over and over again. That systematic component to breaking out of the meltdown cycle is really necessary, because if your child's receiving all kinds of feedback, you get tired because you're feeling like a nag, but your child's also tired, and that impacts their own self-esteem and capacity to feel capable of solving their own problems. And again, just perpetuates the issue. All right, guys, so how do we break out of this pattern? If you find yourself needing that help and not knowing where to start, or not knowing how to break out of this pattern, and you've tried all of the things, either way, we can help parents on either side of the journey. We encourage you to book a call with our team. Go to meganthompsoncoaching.com/talk or meganthompsoncoaching.com/teen talk if you're parents of a teenager, high school age and above. And we're going to have a conversation with you. Well, myself or one of our coaches will break down where you're stuck and what your challenges are and what you've tried already, and all of the philosophies or the theories, but also talking about your strategies. What have you experienced in parenting your child thus far, given how many years you've been parenting? And then we'll talk about what your goals are, whether or not what we do, which is to help parents eliminate those daily meltdowns, is part of your life's journey. If you're able to see the light at the end of the tunnel and observe what your family's goals are and what your goals are make sense in terms of honoring your child's big emotions without perpetuating those big behaviors, then we'll tell you that whether or not what we do is going to be a good fit for you. And if we feel like there's something that's going to be different or more effective or more efficient that you need to do first, or instead of working with us, then we have that conversation, right? Because we invite families into our program only if we know that we can help them. And that's only part of where this conversation comes from. If we feel like there's something that parents need that's going to be more effective, that it doesn't include what we do and whether or not we can help you guide yourselves out of this pattern, then we steer you in that direction. We teach you exactly what you need to do, who you need to call, what you need to research, whatever it is, so that you have a step-by-step plan at the end of that conversation. All right, so it takes about an hour. Make sure that you are able to find that time and create a little wiggle room in your schedule beyond that if it's necessary, so that you have that observation of being able to dive in with a skilled and expert coach on observing where you're stuck and being able to take action on that same conversation. All right, again, lovely talking to you, and I look forward to speaking with you soon.